Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be diving into something you might find a little bit surprising.
Oh,
Yeah, we're taking a look at this push for gender-inclusive leadership,
okay.
but not in the place you'd expect.
All right.
We're focusing on business schools.
Interesting.
Yeah, those institutions that are supposed to be all about, equality and everything.
Right.
Well, get this, they often struggle to achieve it themselves, especially in leadership roles.
Yeah, that is kind of ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
They're teaching future leaders about diversity and inclusion, but then the structure of the institutions themselves can make it harder for women to reach those top spots.
Yeah, and to really understand this better, we are digging into this fascinating article from the November 2023 Journal of Management. It's
What?
called Stronger Together, a call for gender-inclusive leadership in business schools.
Catchy.
And what really struck me was how it calls out the elephant in the room.
What's that?
It's this historical masculine structure that still has a strong hold on business schools today.
Yeah, it's not about like wood-paneled rooms and cigars anymore, but that legacy is definitely there, you know?
Right.
If you think about it, how many women do you see holding those prestigious chaired professorships?
Not many.
Yeah, the article points out that these roles are still overwhelmingly held by men.
It's true.
And even when women do make it into leadership, they often become the token woman,
Right.
under intense scrutiny and pressure to represent their whole gender.
Yeah, it's almost like a no-win situation.
Yeah.
Because if they're assertive, they're seen as bossy. But if they're more collaborative, then they might be viewed as not having those leadership qualities.
You've hit on a really crucial point there.
Okay.
This double bind that women often face.
Yeah.
But what I found so insightful in the article was this idea of the pet to threat phenomenon.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So imagine this. You have a talented junior woman.
Okay.
She's initially championed,
Yeah.
mentored.
Everyone loves her.
Right. Everyone loves her potential, but as she starts to rise and get more confident and starts to challenge the status quo, guess what happens?
I'm going to guess she's no longer the pet,
Right.
and she becomes a threat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's almost like this subconscious reaction to protect that existing power structure.
Wow.
And they give a really vivid example in the article.
Wow.
It's a story about this female professor who was initially praised for her really innovative research ideas,
Uh-huh.
but then when she applied for a leadership role, faced significant pushback.
Oh, no.
She was suddenly seen as too ambitious
Real?
and not a team player.
That's so frustrating.
Right.
I mean, you would think business schools, of all places,
Right.
would be more aware of these dynamics.
You would hope so, but the article makes it clear that awareness is really only the first step.
Right.
We need concrete action.
For sure.
And thankfully, they offer some really practical solutions.
I like solutions.
So for instance, they emphasize the importance of transparency in data collection and reporting.
Okay.
Imagine if business schools had to publicly share data on the gender breakdown
yeah.
of their faculty and leadership.
I mean, that would hold them accountable.
It would create real pressure for change.
It would. That's a great point.
But I'm sure some institutions would resist that level of transparency.
Oh, absolutely.
But the article really argues that this kind of public accountability is essential
Yeah.
if we want to dismantle these really deeply ingrained masculine norms.
It makes sense.
And it's not just about numbers, though.
What else?
They also talk about making that process for awarding those prestigious positions like chaired professorships,
Yeah.
more transparent and merit-based.
Okay.
So that means clear criteria, open discussions, and really a conscious effort to avoid bias.
So moving away from those closed-door decisions where unconscious bias can easily creep in
Exactly.
makes sense.
But there's more.
Okay, there's always more.
The article also mentions creating these more inclusive signals and symbols.
Okay, what does that even mean in a business school?
Well, think about it.
Okay.
Those hallways lined with portraits of all those influential figures,
Right.
how many of them are women?
Not many.
Exactly.
It's about sending that visual message
Yes.
that women belong in these spaces.
That their contributions are valued and celebrated.
I can see how that could make a big difference.
Yeah. And speaking of seeing things differently, the article also tackles this big issue
Oh, what's that?
that affects women disproportionately.
Okay.
Caregiving responsibilities.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
They advocate for more gender-neutral policies and practices.
Like what?
Things like providing childcare support, offering flexible work arrangements,
Okay.
and really just understanding the demands of family life.
Those are all really practical steps that can make a huge difference.
Right. It's about creating a supportive and equitable environment
Yeah,
that recognizes the reality of people's lives.
I love it.
But this is just the beginning of the conversation.
Those more.
Yeah, we're going to be back in just a minute to explore how performance evaluations can sometimes work against women in academia,
Okay.
even when they're doing stellar work.
Sounds juicy.
I can't wait.
Okay, so we've talked about the overall structure and culture,
Yeah.
but what about the systems
Yeah.
that are actually supposed to be evaluating people fairly?
Mm-hmm.
So we're diving into performance evaluations now,
Okay.
because they can be a bit of a minefield even with the best of intentions.
I bet.
Yeah, the article calls out some serious issues with how faculty are actually assessed in business schools.
This is where it gets really interesting for me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because I always wondered how much those student evaluations mattered.
Right.
You know, the ones we fill out at the end of every semester.
Yeah.
Are those really like the be-all and end-all for professors?
Well, you would think student feedback would be super valuable,
Yeah.
but here's the catch.
What's that?
A lot of research has shown that those evaluations are often riddled with gender bias.
It's not about whether a woman is actually a good teacher. It's about these deeply ingrained perceptions and stereotypes. Studies have shown that women are consistently rated lower,
Oh, wow.
even when their teaching is objectively just as good as their male colleagues.
I had no idea it was that bad.
Yeah.
So it's like those qualities we traditionally associate with good teaching, like nurturing empathy,
Right.
being approachable,
Yeah.
those could actually work against women in those evaluations.
It's crazy, right?
It is kind of wild.
The same qualities that would make someone a great mentor or leader
Yeah.
could be perceived as weaknesses in the academic world.
Wow.
And that's just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
The article also points out that research evaluations can be pretty murky.
Murky how?
It's not just about how much you publish, but
Right.
where you publish.
Oh, okay.
And guess what? Those journal rankings that determine prestige, those can be totally subjective.
So it's like an old boys club where everyone knows the unspoken rules. Except for the people who haven't traditionally been part of that club.
Exactly, and that can be a huge barrier for women and minorities who are
Yeah.
trying to break into those top-tier journals.
Right?
They might not have those same networks or mentors to guide them.
Of course.
And then, to make matters worse, there's this whole category of service work
Yeah.
that often falls disproportionately on women.
I heard about this.
Things like mentoring students, serving on committees, organizing events.
It's like all that invisible labor.
Yes, all the stuff that keeps a university running,
Yeah.
but doesn't get recognized.
Exactly.
And because it's not clearly defined or measured, women might end up doing a ton of service work
Oh, yeah.
without getting any credit for it
Of course not.
in their performance reviews.
It's like they're being penalized for being good citizens.
Right. And here's where it gets even more complicated.
Oh, boy.
The article highlights how women, especially women of color, are often judged
And what?
on these vague criteria like professionalism or collegiality.
Hold on. Those kind of sound like code words
They do.
for something else. Like, what are they really getting at with those terms?
Often it boils down to whether a woman conforms to traditional gender stereotypes.
Right.
If she's assertive
Right.
or challenges the status quo,
Yeah.
she might be seen as unprofessional or difficult.
But a man who exhibits those same behaviors
Yeah,
might be seen as a strong leader.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's the classic double standard.
For sure. And this is where that concept of cultural taxation comes in.
Right.
It's like women of color are expected to take on these extra burdens
Right.
related to diversity and inclusion just because of their identity.
You're exactly right.
It's a lot.
It's like they're being asked to shoulder the responsibility for an entire institution's diversity efforts
Yeah.
on top of their regular workload.
It's a lot to ask.
And while that work is obviously incredibly important, it can take time and energy away
Of course.
from things like research and publications, which
Okay.
are often those key metrics for promotion.
Yeah, it's like the system is working against them.
And perpetuating inequality even when people have good intentions.
This is making me realize we need to rethink those traditional models of performance evaluation.
I agree.
It's like we're using these outdated tools to measure success. And those tools can be biased against women in so many ways.
It's true.
But the good news is that the article doesn't just point out the problems,
Right.
it also offers some solutions.
Yes.
So what are some of the key takeaways for creating a more fair system?
Well, transparency is a big one.
Okay.
The article suggests really clearly defining the criteria for evaluating research, teaching, and service,
Yeah.
and making those criteria open and accessible to everyone.
I like that.
They also recommend using more objective measures like behaviorally anchored rating scales,
Okay.
which actually gives specific examples
Right.
of what constitutes good performance.
So moving away from those vague and subjective assessments
Right.
towards something more concrete and measurable.
Ex-
I like that. But what about those unconscious biases that can still creep in,
Yeah.
even when you have clear criteria?
Well, that's where things get interesting.
Okay, tell me more.
They suggest bringing in like these independent trained observers
Oh, really?
into those selection and promotion processes.
Interesting.
So these people are specifically looking for signs of bias
Okay.
and can help mitigate unfair practices.
So having like a neutral third party to make sure everyone's getting a fair shake.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
And it's not just about having the right systems in place.
Right.
It's about educating those evaluators about their own unconscious bias
For sure.
and how that bias can actually influence their judgments.
It's like a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
You've got clear criteria, objective measures, independent observers, and then ongoing training.
That's right.
Seems like a pretty comprehensive strategy.
It's a lot to consider, but that's not all this article has to offer.
Oh, there's more.
There's one more challenge, and it goes beyond individual evaluations to actually question the foundation of research in business schools.
All right. I'm ready when you are.
Yeah.
All right, so we talked about those kind of hidden barriers within business schools,
Yeah.
the structure, the evaluations.
Uh-huh.
But this last point from the article really blew my mind.
Oh, yeah.
It's about the type of research that gets prioritized,
Okay.
the questions that we're even asking,
Yeah.
and whose experiences are even considered worthy of study.
This is where it gets really meta.
It does.
We're not just talking about individual careers anymore,
Right.
but
No.
about how knowledge is created and whose voices are amplified
Right.
within these institutions that are supposed to be leading the way.
Okay.
The article highlights this real blind spot
Oh.
when it comes to research topics that directly affect women in the workplace.
So, like, what kind of topics are we talking about? Give me some examples.
Okay, so think about those unique challenges that women face.
Right.
Things like pregnancy discrimination,
Yeah.
balancing act of work and family, or even the specific health and well-being needs of women.
Right.
These are all massive issues that impact millions of women.
Of course.
But the article points out they're often sidelined
Really?
or dismissed as these like niche interests
Wow.
within business school research.
It's like we're missing this huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
If we're not studying these issues, how can we create workplaces that are truly equitable and inclusive?
Exactly. And it's not just about adding new research areas either.
What else?
It's also about looking at those existing fields of study through a more gender-inclusive lens.
Me exactly.
Okay, so take leadership.
Okay.
Those traditional models of leadership that emphasize assertiveness and risk-taking,
Right.
those are often based on a very masculine perspective.
So we could be missing out on a whole range of leadership styles and approaches
Yeah.
that are just as effective or even more so in today's world.
You got it. We need to expand our definition of what it means to be a good leader.
Makes sense.
And the same goes for other areas like organizational justice.
Right.
It's not enough to just control for gender in our studies.
Okay.
We need to really dig into how gender shapes people's experiences of fairness and inequality in the workplace.
It's like we've been looking at the world through this really narrow lens,
Right.
and it's time to widen that perspective.
I agree.
But how do we actually do that? How do we shift that research agenda
Yeah.
in a way that's truly inclusive?
The article has some good suggestions.
Made on me.
They encourage scholars to think outside the box,
Okay.
to adopt new theoretical approaches and methods that actually center the experiences of women.
Interesting.
They also talk about treating gender and race not just as these variables to control for,
Yeah.
but as central aspects of the phenomena that we're studying.
So it's about asking different questions,
Yes.
using different tools,
Yes,
and ultimately changing the way we think about knowledge creation.
exactly. It's about challenging those old assumptions and creating space for new voices and new perspectives.
I like it.
And it's not just about the research itself either.
It's about who's doing it.
Exactly. The article stresses the importance of mentoring and sponsoring women in academia,
Yeah.
giving them the support and opportunities they need to thrive.
It's about creating those networks of support and guidance,
Right.
which can be So crucial.
especially in a field that can feel so competitive and isolating.
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
from those structural barriers
Uh-huh.
to those hidden biases,
Right.
to the very way that knowledge is produced.
Yeah.
It's clear that creating truly gender-inclusive business schools is a complex challenge,
For sure.
but I think the insights from this article give us a powerful roadmap for change.
I am walking away with a renewed sense of hope and possibility.
You too.
And I think the most important question for all of us listening is this. What can we do in our own spheres of influence
Yeah.
to make a difference? How can we challenge those outdated norms and assumptions
Right.
and create a more equitable and inclusive future for everyone?
It's the question we should all be asking.
It is.
It's not just about business schools.
Right.
It's about every organization and every aspect of our lives.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
We'll be back next time with another thought-provoking exploration. But until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.